Hello and welcome to the 13th episode of my podcast, Historians in Conversation. My name is Michał Green and I come from the University of Łódź in Poland. My guest today is Dr. Tirtsah Levie Bernfeld, who is a historian of the Jewish people in the early modern Netherlands and Amsterdam more specifically. She has published extensively on the topic, and her book Poverty and Welfare is perhaps the most intriguing book that was written about the Sephardi Jewish community in the city of Amsterdam. And Tirtsah is an independent scholar. She's not affiliated to any particular university, but nonetheless, she is highly recognized for her research all over the world. I would like to welcome Tirtsah to my podcast, and I hope you enjoy our conversation. Hello and welcome to my podcast, Tirtsah. I'm very glad to have you here with me, face to face. And traditionally, I start my podcast with asking my guests about their background, about their family, where do they come from. So I would like to ask you the same question. Could you tell a little bit about your own family, your childhood, and also first interest in history?
Yes, I'm very happy to have you here in Amsterdam. So I'm coming from a very Dutch Jewish family, meaning that they, my predecessors came from Germany at the end of the 17th and during the 18th century. They settled mostly in Rotterdam and surroundings. Also, some members came from Amsterdam. And they lived throughout the ages there till the Second World War, in which my parents, my grandparents all went to camps. My grandparents and other family members didn't survive. My parents came back. They were engaged in 1940, got married in 1946, and wanted to set up a big Jewish family. So I have two brothers and a sister.
How do you remember your childhood? What did your parents do?
I was a very happy child. I think I got a great childhood. My father was in business. My mother was at home taking care of us, as it was common in those days. I was always very active with, everybody was, with sports, culture, as I mentioned, Jewish community. It was full action, and I worked hard to in high school to get to the end. That was not easy. I always had to work very hard, but that's part of it till today.
Do you remember perhaps when did you discover history as a topic of interest? If you discovered that history was fascinating, do you remember that moment?
Well, that was already in high school, although it was only at the end of my, after I finished my baccalaureate, so my final exams, I changed from English language that I want to study and changed it into history. But I was very much involved in and directed to history of international relations, political science. I think my father was trying to direct me into the Foreign Office in Holland, and I already was interviewed there, etc. But while I was choosing history and at the university, I was given a place in the Amsterdam Historical Museum at that time, now nowadays called Amsterdam Museum, and I got involved in 17th century issues because I had to take care of part of the permanent exhibition. And I got in touch with immigration to the city, and especially immigration of Jews to the city. And I went further into that because I was very much intrigued by the people who came from Spain and Portugal with a so-called hidden identity, and turning outwards into the open. And because of this, this interest in history of the Sephardi community of Amsterdam, I wanted to learn more. There was not so much of an offering of Jewish studies at the University of Amsterdam at that time, and I got a scholarship to study in America at Brandeis University, and I took a course also with Professor Yerushalmi at Harvard University. And as of then, I'm only mostly dealing, I should say, with the history of the new Christians turned into new Jews, especially in Amsterdam and the Western Sephardi diaspora.
This sounds really interesting, and I wonder if you could tell perhaps a little bit about your path to Brandeis. How did you get that place?
That was quite unusual. I just, I went to the Fulbright committee here in Amsterdam on the canals. They had a library there. Remember, I went to look into universities, but nobody was there to help at the university. So, and then somebody told me, Jewish studies, then you have to be at Brandeis. Never heard about Brandeis at that time. It was 1978. So going to America was a big leap into the unknown. And so I applied, but I knew also some books of famous authors on the New Christian Society, and one of them was Yerushalmi, which was close to Brandeis at Harvard. So I applied, and I tried to get all kinds of scholarships from small source fund foundations here in Holland, and I managed to get it all together, and I flew to Boston.
How old were you at the time?
23, 24. So I finished my master, and then I went to the US, and I had a great year. It was for me also a year in which my eyes opened as far as the open Jewish culture society is concerned, because in Holland the Jews at that time tended to live very, let me say, hidden. You didn't talk about being Jewish. That was an identity you kept for yourself in your inner circle. I didn't even talk to my non-Jewish friends at the university that I was Jewish, for example, at that time. That was not supposed to be something you were going to discuss. And it was only after I returned from Brandeis that I learned in America to be proud or to be open about who I really was. And ever since, that's who I am, and how I talk and how I present myself.
So after you finished your studies in the States, you returned to Amsterdam.
I returned here to become curator at the Jewish Museum in Amsterdam. But that was a big disappointment for me, because I didn't, compare to Brandeis, Harvard, and all I saw there, I couldn't I couldn't settle down here, neither in the Jewish community in Holland, nor as working in the Jewish Museum. So after 2 years, decided to continue either at Columbia in New York, where I was accepted, or at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, and I chose for the Hebrew University this time.
Why did you choose for Hebrew University instead of Columbia? It's much more prestigious.
Just a financial consideration. Columbia, I didn't get the tuition scholarship, and I had my MA, and I wouldn't want to start to spend so much money or to take loans, etc. I was not for that. And in Jerusalem, that was it was a better offer, and I'm very happy I did that, because I lived in Jerusalem for 4 years. It was a very rich experience and learned a lot. Got to know also Israeli society. Later on, I married an Israeli Czechoslovakian person. Our house was always half Israeli, half Dutch, or however you want to define it. So it was a good. I got many friends also in Israel, also in America, but it widened my horizon.
Having studied at the Hebrew University, I wonder if while doing the PhD or while starting the PhD, you already had some sort of an academic path or career path in mind. Did you intend to go for an academic career, or perhaps you thought that one day you might return to the museum on a higher position and be the one who decides how things work in a museum? Could you tell a little bit about that?
I'm not sure I was so much career-oriented in that respect. I was very much into my research, and I thought, so whatever comes, comes afterwards. I like teaching. I always like teaching, but I also like museum work very much. Still today, I like material culture. I like visualization of history. I think that's very, very important. I try when I lecture always to include that in my the way I present my material. So I was also a little late because of family circumstances. So it was maybe I could have a career in the United States or something, but I settled for something else. It was more family oriented. It didn't work out the way I want to work it out. On the other hand, I'm very happy the way I work. I can do research, I publish, I give lectures, I teach. So everything is there, what I would have wanted to achieve.
I would like to return once again to the question that I asked you earlier about the career path. Looking at your CV, I see that you've been to many different fellowships all over Europe and in the States, and those were short-term contracts. And I wonder if at any point you were interested in getting a permanent academic career, a stable academic job, or it was not that important because you wanted to continue doing your research and the opportunities that you received in those fellowships allowed you to do so, so it was not your primary concern.
I wanted mostly to do research and being able to do research, and till I finished the research on my book, and my book came out and everything which is connected to that. I already got married, got a child, my husband was traveling internationally, was very little at home, so I had to be, and there was no option of going for a year to Boston or going or trying to get a job in San Diego or you name it. I was in Berlin, and that was something I could combine with life as a mother, as a wife, etc. So I sacrificed part of my career because of other considerations, but that's how it was, and I'm pretty satisfied as where I am now.
You are an established and very well recognized scholar of Jewish studies, and judging by your CV, but also from my personal acquaintance with you, I know that you are constantly being invited all over to give lectures, to give talks, and all of this while being an independent scholar, something that is not always very well looked upon by the academia, because the university gives some sort of intellectual capital, we would say, but you have your own scholarly knowledge and your own scholarly reputation that you build independently of that, and yet you are there, you do great research, which, as I mentioned already, is recognized by everyone who is doing research in the field of Jewish studies, of the early modern Jewish studies.
Well, I think that I concentrate on topics that are not quite so familiar, because also in my field a lot of, I don't know, anyway, it's not familiar. Like I concentrate on women, gender studies, on material culture, aspects that very little work is being done. And then I did my first big research on poverty and welfare, on the poor among Portuguese Jews. Everybody's still today saying they're rich, no? Weren't they rich? What poor? So I think I do research in new fields, and that's why people might tend to want to invite me to certain to their conference of want to hear what I have to say or want to read what I have to write. That's, I don't know otherwise. And I'm in part of, ever since I was in, there's a sort of international circle of, you know, Daniel Swieczynski in America, then there was Joel Shalman in Kaplan in Jerusalem, Jonathan Israel, all these people. I'm kind of in a, it's sort of a club. You're in the group, so I'm in the group of all those, and that's why I think I'm invited also.
Could you reveal how did you manage to enter that group? Because often it's pretty difficult to get into established circles.
Because I think that going to America helped me a lot. Because there I met people and teachers and also friends and colleagues and whoever you want to call them, who invited me, who took me up. Like Daniel Swieczynski was at that time at Brandeis just finishing his research, finishing his PhD. We met in New York. He was not at Brandeis. He was doing his degree for Brandeis. But I remember we met in New York, and ever since we met everywhere. There's also a circle of Dutch Jewish researchers. And between Holland and Israel, there were conferences there. Also, you met everybody. It was kind of a club, So I got into both the Western Sephardi research circles and in the Dutch Jewish research circles connected to Israel. That's how it happened. I don't know how to explain it otherwise.
Looking at your career, I wonder, how did you manage to combine the fact that you were producing high-quality research, and as I already mentioned, which is recognized by everyone who is doing early modern Jewish studies, with being a mother, especially when you mentioned that your husband was traveling, and it certainly required you to invest also more time in the family. Perhaps you could tell a little bit, how did you navigate between those two tasks, two very demanding tasks?
Now, I think that one of the disadvantages of this, of me being a woman, a wife, a mother, is that it took me so long to finish. Because I remember I started on Monday, you start the week, and then by Thursday you finish. Then it's Friday, we had a traditional household, so we had Friday night dinner, etc., whatever. So by Monday, after the weekend, I sat again, for my desk, and I thought, so where did I stop? And that it was week after week that you had to stop and you didn't know. And then you had to start all over again. So I think it takes more time when you have to combine. Or you have to have a husband who takes over a lot of your task, which I didn't have. So it's a continuous struggle. You want to be a good mother. The children needed a lot of attention, one of them especially, and it takes time. You have to help with homework. You have this parents-in-law, mother to take care of, you name it, everything. So there are periods that you think I will never finish, but I finish. But then later you get more time, and so that's how. But I think that in that respect, my career was how you say vertraagd, was delayed because of this, because being a mother, wife, and with a husband who was working internationally and almost never home, or if he was home, then anyway, the tasks were on me.
Just to make the record straight, I would like to ask you, where did you do your PhD, and could you tell a little bit about it? How did it go? How was the study?
So I started at Brandeis with a PhD education, which meant just taking classes. So that is what I did there. But then there was an opening to become a curator at the Amsterdam Museum, and I wasn't sure, yes or no, not to do. My father said I should stay in the US. I took the job, I came back in Amsterdam, and there And then only when I was in Jerusalem after 2 years of Amsterdam that I started to do research on a specific topic. There I worked for around 4 years. Then I went back to Amsterdam to continue my research because that time sources were not yet digitalized. So I had to sit at the archives. They had some films in Jerusalem, but not enough. So I came home after 4 years of Jerusalem, continued my research here. And then slowly I got to, so I got it done. But I had to, then in the end, I got my degree at Hebrew U in Jerusalem, in Har Hatzofim.
Mm-hmm. Could you tell me a little bit about learning languages? Because for your research, you would need to know Spanish and Portuguese, languages that did not come with your family. And you need to know them quite well to be able to read those ancient sources. How did you learn those languages?
Okay, so at Brandeis I had Jewish lessons at the Jewish community in Rotterdam as a child. But we didn't learn very much Hebrew, so I came to Brandeis and they put me on intensive courses, of course. So that is where I started, and I continued those Hebrew courses in Jerusalem while I was there at Hebrew U. There I took a course in Portuguese, and I had a very intense high school education involving Latin and Greek, ancient Greek, but Latin we had I don't know how many hours a week for 6 years. So for me Spanish was not so, I learned that myself. And Portuguese I took, we had a class together with a friend of mine, Miriam Bodian, who is also a colleague of mine today. We were the only two at Hebrew U. A lady from Brazil was teaching us Portuguese. And so I continued a little bit, but with dictionaries and by going through all the sources, I learned to read and also literature. So that's not so difficult for me, also because of this Latin background. And French I speak, so it's all very close.
So once again, to come back to the career point, once you finished your PhD with the Hebrew University, what were your next career steps? What did you do in order to get your first job afterwards?
Yeah, but in Amsterdam, so we were settled in Amsterdam. There was no way of taking the children, at least not in my vision, to take the children under my arms and go to Chicago or something, leave my husband traveling around. So we were in Amsterdam. There were not so many positions. I was asked while doing my research to be assistant in the Biblioteca Rossentaliana, but I didn't want to do that.
The Library of Amsterdam.
But I declined because I wanted first to finish my PhD. And other than that, there were not so many opportunities or openings in Amsterdam. So it kind of didn't work out to find a job, and maybe I was not insistent enough as well. So that's how it worked out.
So what does actually motivate you to continue research? Because you could have just handed your diploma in the office without having an academic job. How do you motivate yourself to continue research and reading, going on conferences, meeting new people, and then doing podcasts? Could you tell me a little bit, what does prevent you from stopping?
Yes, sometimes it crosses my mind. I'm not the youngest anymore. But somehow all the time there's something on my desk. Some project they ask me for, or something is on my desk. And if it's not on my desk, I just take out a topic and think, this is interesting, I'm going to do the research, and I see where I get. And then there's a conference, and then I say, oh, I have here this, I would like to talk about it, I worked it out, etc. So it's both coming from outside and my own interest in research. One has to do something. I like to be busy with it, and I like the exchange of ideas, and I'm curious to how people live, how people acted, curious in the social and cultural aspects of the history, and that keeps me going. And I decided I don't want to give it up yet.
Do you think that this fire of curiosity is a must for a historian, that without it you cannot really do your work?
Oh yes, I think so. Otherwise you get lost. It's very interesting to do research, but it can be also very boring. You have to do things that you wouldn't like to do. So you need to have a drive, and a drive towards curiosity, a drive also to publish what you think is important for people to know. I don't publish because I like to have my name somewhere or like to be famous or something. I remember my professor in Jerusalem, one of my professors, Professor Beinart, told me that because of the topic I chose for my PhD, that I once will be world famous. And I said, oh, so what? And he was so surprised about my reaction. You don't like that? I said, that's not important to me.
But now you are.
I'm not sure.
But in your field you are, and that I can say with confidence. And for me it's also something that is very important, to have that fire of curiosity, to be a historian, because I think that otherwise you cannot really do your work properly. But at the same time, I know quite a few people who treat their work as historians as work, as a job, that they come to do their best at that job. And I always remember my very first podcast with William Freyhoff, who I think is an admirable historian and who is very productive and who has done a lot of very important research, discovered many interesting things. But in the podcast, he told me that he treated it always as a job. And I'm not sure, and I didn't ask him at the time, and now I actually regret it, I should have. Does it mean that he didn't have the fire for history, or it meant that he was passionate about it, and despite that passion, it was a job, and first of all, a job?
Yeah, I think in my case, it's the other way around. I don't do it just to have a job or something. I do it because it interests me, and I want to bring it also to the attention of others, to the open world. But in principle, it's because I am interested in it, and I want to make something out of it, not because it's my job or something to do.
As an independent researcher, do you think that it is something that PhD students should consider already at a stage of their PhD, that perhaps they might not find a permanent academic position, that history can be done on a high level, also as, well, sometimes a side job and sometimes alongside other things that one has to do in their lives, and still can be successful in that? Is it something that you would recommend to consider already in that stage, or it's something that should just come as it goes?
Oh yeah, I think, well, I'm one of the examples, but also it's of course one has to get bread on the table, and I was in the position that I didn't have to go out of the house to get a income at that point. I mean, at some point, not before, so I think that, I think you could do, and there are many examples of people who are doing research and having a job on the side just to have a basic income, and publish works because they are in research part-time or on the side, because there's no other way of living that way.
It reminds me in a way of the Jewish rabbis of the late antiquity, when they were working during the day, and in the evening they would gather and do their own biblical study. And I think that in a way it's something similar.
Yeah, well, that's a big compliment, but that I'm not sure I'm a right example of it. But it's in that respect, yes, that's how it is.
And now, if to turn to your own research, I wonder what was the most important discovery that you made, you think, on the Jewish history of Amsterdam, something that is important to know?
I think women, gender. I remember I discussed with my professor Josef Kaplan, the topics for a PhD. He said, you know what, the poor is a subject that has not been searched for so much, and the second is gender, women. And I found women among the poor, not only women among the poor, a majority of women among the poor, and very interesting cases, and the whole situation about women in a community that tried to put them a little bit aside or at the background, and nothing had ever been published about it. And I was surprised. They do Spinoza, and they do Robio de Castro, and they do Jeronimo Nunes da Costa, and whatever. But women, nobody ever thought about it. And I found them lists and lists of women getting charity or organizations taking care of women. So it was that was a big discovery, I must say, for myself. And later on also for the wider world, because I published not only on the poverty and the women among them, but later I took the women aside and published on them, both rich and poor and the middle class, etc. And I'm still dealing with it, family life, domestic life.
Well, Jewish history is a subject that receives, it seems, a lot of attention, and I wonder if in your opinion there are still white spots in this history in the early modern period, something that perhaps the next generation of historians could do?
Well, I think for Ashkenazi history, so history of the immigrants from the German lands and Poland and Central Europe, there's a lot to be done. Also because you first have to learn a lot Hebrew, Yiddish. The same with Spanish and Portuguese, of course. If a student would come to me and say, so what can I study? Mm-hmm. Again, also gender in that community. And a lot of material culture. I take care of the early modern period. The 18th century, that is within the early modern period, hasn't been studied very much. And the same holds true for the 19th century. So I think there is a lot to be done. Integration and all that, the emancipation, that's still a field that can be discovered.
How separate do you think the Jews were in the early modern period in Amsterdam?
You have Jews and Jews, Sephardi Jews, Ashkenazi Jews. I think the Sephardi Jews were much more integrated. They came as integrated citizens. Not citizens, integrated people in Spanish and Portuguese society. They didn't come from the ghettos. So in Amsterdam they had problems that the community draw boundaries to get a community, to put them in, to have them take a new identity. So I think they were also here started to be quite integrated earlier than the Ashkenazi Jews. But in general, they were not an isolated group. There were dealings not only between Sephardim and Ashkenazim, but also with the Dutch, with their surroundings. So I don't see them as isolated, not even in the early modern period.
And this is perhaps my last question for today. I wonder, you, as a Jewish person, researching Jewish subject, and then presenting this subject to a non-Jewish academic audience, did you encounter any, perhaps, disinterest in the subject from the non-Jewish academic community?
Well, the academic community in Holland is very interested in Jewish history. So anything, that's one. How is it as a Jew, I always, I think that my interest in Jewish history came from the fact that I didn't feel attached to the Jewish community here. For me, it was a way to deal with my identity and find interest in that without, so I could disconnect from what I was surrounded with. So for me, that is, in fact, it fulfilled me because it fulfilled my identity. I wanted to know more about it. I think that Jewish history here is very much appreciated in Holland, Dutch Jewish history, and people are eager to get to know. In fact, we are now just publishing, together with Bart Wallet, a new book, a short history of the Jews in the Netherlands, both in English and in Dutch, in short text, and I think that will attract the attention of people who want to know. I think it's both the academics but also the non-academic world who is interested in it. The Jews in the Netherlands have always, because of the war, I think, there's a big, not only interest, but there's sort of, I don't know how you say it, I don't want to say guilt, but there's something different than it's not just another aspect of history. Jewish history is something special. The same with the position of Israel here and the way they deal with it.
Thank you very much, Tirtsah, for participating in my podcast, for telling us about your research path, about the difficulties that you faced and the way that you overcame those difficulties. And I invite all of our listeners to read Tirtsah's articles that are found online and also in the description of this podcast. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michael.